Now, it's time for the State of the Data Nation interview. This is where the ODI's co-founders appear on stage together to reflect on the past year in data and technology. And what a year it's been. To put them through their paces, we have the influential tech journalist and commentator, the news editor at MIT Technology Review, Charlotte G.
Hi, thanks, Navdeep. Now, first off, I want to go to Tim. Go straight in there. What are you most excited about from the world of technology in the last year?
Well, I think, in a way, a huge number of things are taking off, which I've always wanted to happen. But with personal data and solid on one side, it's actually things actually happening with AI. I mean, I used to think of AI as sci-fi. The fact that actually it is so powerful that it can do things that I wrote about AI having conversational 5 years ago, and never imagined that it would be this powerful in my lifetime.
I mean, Nigel, you've been into AI since before it was cool. What's exciting you in that world and in the world of tech more broadly?
I mean, to Tim's point, the last year has been extraordinary, but AI has been around, in its current labeled form. AI, that was 1956 when the Dartmouth conference. Turing was writing about machine intelligence. We did machine intelligence research in the 40s and 50s. So there is a long history. But I think we've seen this extraordinary convergence of compute power, data, and these new transformer models, which have allowed us to engage with extended conversational agents that can generate code, that can actually generate other kinds of content, multimedia content, imagery, music. And I think there's a moment when humans are faced with that kind of AI. It kind of is a bit of a wake-up call, and we've seen that with everything that's happened. I remember when Kasparov was beaten by Deep Blue in 96, 97, he said he'd played a lot of computers, but he could smell a new kind of intelligence across the table. Now, actually, what Deep Blue was doing was looking up hundreds of millions of places a second, of positions a second, and that literally unnerved Kasparov. What we've got to do is, in this new AI context, is ask ourselves, what's really happening with this technology? Where are its strengths? Where's its potential for good? And where are the potential harms and safety considerations we need to think about?
And I have to ask, because of course you're a real expert in this. We've always seen those kind of glimmers of, there's something behind the computer there. And you look at like Blake Lemoine, obviously at Google, who believed that he was speaking with something intelligent. What's your feeling on this? This sort of desperation to see something behind there. Do you see any truth to that?
No, I think it's a very human instinct. I think we will invest objects from toys we cherished as children through to the personas we'll be talking to in our AI systems we suffuse them with human characteristics, intention, motivation, goals, attitudes. And what we're getting back with these extraordinary predictive machines, these next token generators, is a reflection back of the distilled interests of humanity. And that, of course, does sound like ourselves in that chamber of coherent echoes. But I don't think we should mistake the one for the actual real presence of sentience. Some people think that that's just a matter of time. I think there'll be a long time to go before we get to situations where we really think about that. But the challenges that we'll face with these very capable systems are already here, and we're living and dealing with them right now. And of course, what we'll come on to talk about, I'm sure, is the whole challenge around the data that trains them and how we make sure that these things are, in some sense, the best they can be.
Yes, absolutely. We'll definitely return to that. In the meantime, I wanted to ask Tim.
Please. Pick up on them because but. So I think there's yes, just because it seems to be like a person you shouldn't assume there's a person in it. But on the other hand, just because it is in fact a box, because it is in fact a computer, if it's thinking, it's thinking. So that's Alan Turing. The Turing test is if it seems to be thinking, it's actually thinking. And so just because it is physically made of computer stuff, don't think it isn't thinking. If it's quite reasonable to think about make a machine which is smarter than a person and acts like a person. Just don't think because it's machine it won't.
Well, you get into some very deep philosophical questions here about what is the nature of a brain, of thoughts, of consciousness. What is all of this anyway? But Tim, I was going to ask you, amid all of this, what concerns you about this explosion in large language models and other forms of AI?
I think this really, I tried to divide it very clearly into two parts. There's the what happens if it gets out of control, which is really a completely different question from anything else. So containment, the risk of somebody making something which ends up being smarter than them, and then ends up like House or like all the movies.
Yeah.
So there's that, so that is completely separate from all of the other issues. Okay, how do we make this thing work without? How do we worries about the bias that it will make all our decisions, but it will make it with all of our biases or worse biases. So all of the issues about how AI in society, or in a way there's a separate bucket, all the issues about what to do about jobs. Will it take my jobs if it shouldn't be taking my jobs? Retraining people to do different jobs. So there's a huge amount of work, as a few people have referred to already today. Society needs to figure out what it's going to look like in the future, and how we need to move into it. So as AI has become actors in all our offices and the homes that we understand, that becomes a very empowering place for people as well.
So you're sort of talking about AI agents. I mean, OpenAI at their conference yesterday was talking about exactly this. Do you think that's where we're going? Where we're going to have sort of assistants, each of us, that will be able to offload more boring tasks to?
Yes.
All right.
Definitely.
I shouldn't ask a yes or no question, should I?
Yes.
But yeah, so is that your where you think it will end up?
One of the things I've always thought was really important from the point of view of sort of myself, and always trying to push for sort of digital empowerment, digital sovereignty of people. I suppose I've always wanted to know AI works for me, and I notice, Siri, who do you work for? I don't work for you. You ChatGPT, who do you work for? You work for OpenAI. Each of the Alexa and Siri, they all work for big companies, and so they have those big companies' interests at heart at the end of the day. Suppose there was an AI which worked for me. And so that's not unreasonable. I wrote about this ages ago, but I didn't imagine we'd have things that could do it. But if you put that constraint on, it's not actually crazy, because my doctor works for me, right? And my lawyer works for me. So we already have regulations which says, it's required for doctors to work for the patients. So if we know how, that's in a way could be a simple regulation to roll out. We know how to make the Hippocratic Oath a thing. And so yeah, but AI works for me. Yeah, I think it will be powerful, because it'll help me figure out what I want to do with the world, and maybe it might help me what sort of vacation I want to have, but also because it'll have that. It'll also know all the vacations that there are. So I think when they get better at actually working with me, then they will be really very, very powerful assistants.
Yeah, that's quite a vision that I think all of us would be very excited by. Nigel, what concerns you amid all of this in particular? What are the parts that aren't quite as rosy around this picture?
Well, I mean, just to say, I think Tim's observation, by the way, that I remember a professor of AI, Patrick Winston, MIT's professor of AI, had this wonderful phrase, which is, there are lots of smart that aren't smart like us. So we could well be building systems which we are completely comfortable with describing as intelligent systems, okay? And we can get the deep philosophical questions about intelligent like us, self-aware, all of those questions. Leaving that to one side, they will still be enormously capable. And as we use them to augment ourselves, and I think that's this issue, is where does that power relationship exist? Who is working for who in this relationship? So I think the vision, and I think we've shared this, of a companion, of somebody who is loyal to my interests, or a group of people that I care about, a collective of some sort, so a group. That will be an interesting development that we will see. One would like to think that the world will be one in which we're emancipated from boring and tedious jobs. In fact, again, Tim wrote about this when he talked about the idea of social machines that would do all the boring stuff to allow us to do the creative stuff. What you often see, though, in the realization of this technology is that people end up doing a lot of the boring stuff as well, a lot of the tedious stuff, a lot of the kind of hard to automate grunt work, or even the stuff that you could automate somehow gets repurposed to human agency. So I think it will be a more complex and textured world that we're moving into. I've never believed that the systems will lead to the abolition of human labor and work, not least because the wonderful video we saw from Alan, the wonderful presentation around AI in creative content just shows the extent to which human creatives are already using this technology to augment their works of fiction and their works, their creative output. So I do look forward to a world in which this entanglement produces AI for good, as well as, of course, inevitably we'll be worrying about the darker sides. Where do we spend our time worrying about those? I think, again, to Tim's point, where we historically, there is an existential risk that we need to be mindful of. These things escaping control, but the stuff around routine application in everything from making decisions around creditworthiness to bail setting to issues around whether I'm going to get access to certain sorts of social security, and on and on. We want to be very confident that, well, first of all, you want to know where this information is originating. A thing should say what it is and be what it says. So if this is algorithmically generated, I'd like to know. I'd like to know a lot about the provenance, about how this information came to be, this decision was made. I'd like an appeal to a human decision maker if all other kind of things failed. And actually you saw that in the Biden executive orders, that those ideas are starting to emerge. So I'm quite hopeful that in this discourse, as long as it's a wide and varied discourse, we'll get this range of core interests from civic society, from groups who represent individual collectives, and from the private and public sector.
Mm-hmm. And Tim, how do you feel about this shift towards regulation that we're starting to see? Do you think we're going on the right track? What would you like to see in terms of concrete proposals?
Well, as I said, I have a regulation that makes that I get for me is quite an easy thing to do. In general, throughout the history of the web, there's always been battles about people who said, okay, is it too much, is it too little regulation? And the answer is actually, it really depends. You can't just talk about, wave your hands about regulation in general. Yes, there should be regulation about AI safety and containment, but then regulations about bias is something completely different. And they apply, if the AI is being used in the courts, then that's regulations about how the courts work. If AI are being used to hire people, that's so the regulations are that you need really the massive complex landscape of it. It's not a question just to say we need more or we need less.
Yes, it's very simple to say we need regulation, but what does that mean? Now, much as I would like to fill up all our time just with my questions, we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, and I believe Navdeep is going to help us out with those.
Yeah, Charlotte, we've got lots and lots of questions coming in. Some quite popular ones. Do you agree with Rishi Sunak in that the big tech companies shouldn't be allowed to mark their own homework? And how far should we go with regulation to ensure we don't stifle innovation for good?
Well, I think that's just a segue on from what Tim was saying there. It's often the first instinct with a new technology is to think we need new regulation. We need to reach for some new laws. Actually, there is a lot of existing law. There's a lot of existing regulation. There are regulatory authorities already. And if you go from one sector to another sector, you can see the shape of how that might work. AI applied in health, or AI applied in financial decision making, or AI deployed in retail. We look at these contexts and say, is this leading to unfair and discriminatory practices? Are people on the wrong side of decisions here? Do we think that different groups are being treated fairly? And there is existing legislation. I do think we're going to be needing to address particular challenges around what the nature of an explanation or accountability of these systems might look like. And I think that's where we'll see some innovative work. The UK it's a principles-based approach that the Prime Minister has said we're going to adopt in the UK. And we have an aversion against trying to write normative rules that apply in all sorts of situations and contexts. And I think to Tim's point, that's what will be required. Degree of sensitivity, context matters.
Transparency, of course. If big tech is marking its own homework, then one of the things it can do is be very transparent about the algorithms, but for example, the system card, which was this document released with ChatGPT, was a really interesting sort of. It was a list of we tried all these things on it. We tried to put it in a situation. Would it try to escape? Would it try to fool people? Would it? And found actually. So that's, I think, being very open about those things. So in a way, yeah, tech companies shouldn't mark the homework, but it has to be marked by people who understand all this stuff, and that's not your politicians, unfortunately. Obviously,
and I think to that point as well, it needs cooperation between, for example, the universities and these big tech platforms. That's why the AI Safety Institute would be an interesting idea, giving other researchers who don't have these huge models. Universities can't form and don't have them in place, but access to these models, because they can ask the challenging questions that people haven't quite thought of yet, or show the failure modes where you think, crikey, I wouldn't want to have the system working as currently constituted in this context.
Yeah, another question, which is quite popular. How do we ensure that AI agents do what is best for me versus what is best for monetization for the company which has built that agent?
Well, I wrote about Charlie years ago. Charlie is the answer is you partly regulation, just like your doctor when you go to the chemist. The chemist helps you find the right drug on a good day. In a bad scenario, parallel world, the chemist is working for the big pharma and is trying to get you to get the most expensive thing, which will get you addicted. Okay, so the rules are with chemists, the rules are with doctors, the rules are with lawyers. They work for me, and so we can regulate that. How you actually do it. So inflection AI is, for example, there's a thing called relatively new called PI.ai, where that's the idea that it works for you. So if you've been so playing with that sort of thing is a good idea, because they're trying to go into that vein with that spirit, because it's not rocket science from the point of view of policy. We just and so how do you do it? And so it's the way you fine tune the machine. It's the way you do that. Those last rounds of training, you can take this.
That'll be an interesting opportunity, I think, where this reinforcement learning through human feedback will be very much about your individual values and preferences and interests. And I think we'll come to judge which companies are really trying hard to give you some degree of sovereignty over that decision making, or at least as much, either through regulation or much stronger interest in the data that's yours and that's generated off the back of your interaction with the state or wherever. And that will bring us around this interesting balance between just how much of this personal data do we want to disclose, and try and avoid this enclosure that happened with so much of our data. We've been there before with the social media platforms, and this feeling that, no, we'd like to get a much stronger guarantee of our interests so we can train these systems appropriate to our interests.
Yeah, just one more question I'll have for the first time. I don't know if this is for the first time. We can have a conversation with a non-human agent. Is that conversation different to the conversation that happens between humans, and what are the impacts of those differences?
I think I say no, it isn't, and he'd say yes, it is. I think so fundamentally, if you're having a conversation. The Turing test was that you should talk to a person or a computer through a teletype, because at that time all they had was a screen, because at that time all computers could do was type. So if you wanted to persuade somebody that your computer was actually as smart as a human being, then you had to set both of them up with teletypes. And so people have done that old version of the Turing test lots of times. After a while, computers actually got pretty good at it. And so now it's that they can actually all have a conversation with you just like a person. I think what Alan Turing would say is, if it seems to be having a conversation with you, if it works for you like a person, if it ends up leading to the same insights, if it shows you the same care, if it's then that doesn't matter whether in fact it's made of it's having the same function in your life. Yes, it could be a therapist. Yes, it could be a doctor. as long as it's both got all the power of the person to do all those things, but also the values of the person to do the right things.
Well, I'm going to say up to a point, Lord Copper. So, I think that's right. I mean, that behavioural equivalence is hugely important. The imitation game that Turing talked about, but actually, what we know when we're having a conversation with one another, with ourselves, that you've had a lived life, a rich set of experience, that you've suffered life, loss, and love, and these machines haven't, right? And that's just a profoundly different. To say they might in the future, all true, but at this moment in time, I'm going to be pretty confident about saying, no, they don't. And so the status of my sensibilities towards it are different. That's not to say they won't become important parts or companions in my life, but it's important to, I think, recognise that there's a difference in kind at the moment, the qualities of my conversation with a person who has had the same embedding in life and life experience as me as a human being. Or as Tim, there's a difference there.
Charlotte.
Well, these are great questions. Please keep them coming. I'm wrestling back briefly for a couple of my own. So I wanted to look a little bit about some of the practices that have gone into these AI models, because of course they can be very opaque, very complex, don't fully understand how some of the inner workings are. But Nigel, I wanted to ask a bit about whether the data practices that they've been built on are going to cause a problem.
Well, and I think this is where I think the interest of the ODI and a lot of other people who work across this data ecosystem space are important. I mean, just obviously, there's one or two areas where the first examples, if you like, of organised labour, kind of saying we don't have to put up with this settlement with the Screenwriters Guild, America saying, okay, we don't want you to be employing in all contexts these kinds of systems, or indeed the kind of issues that are coming through now on reproducing almost equivalent music or sounds of artists whose IP is protected. There'll be organisations going to bat for them. So there'll be a lot of testing the legal boundaries around IP and whether data has or has not been appropriated in the way that it should have been, or whether the new context we're in amount to wanting to call up those same protections around IP and content creation. There's a bunch of stuff there. I think the more general question of how these models have been trained, I mean, open crawl has been around for a long time. The fact you could get so much of this extraordinary content from the web is the thing that's allowed these systems to be built at all. And we also know that the types of knowledge and data ingested makes a big difference to the qualities and properties. Microsoft has built a language model recently where their great title is textbooks is all you need. So those models trained on 50% of their content coming from the social media will be very, in a sense, informed about human interests, but they'll be full of a ton of issues that need to end up being trained out or detoxified out of the system. So the balance of the data used will be material, and some data seems to be very, very important to the quality of the type of information you get back. So Wikipedia, only about 5% of the original large language model Palm that Google produced that was used against a lot of these benchmarks, only 5%, but an outsized impact in terms of the quality of answers being given back. I think this is a space that needs a lot more research.
Yeah, it does often feel like the two sides are completely talking at odds, because there's sort of we've already scraped the data and we've already used it to train the models from the tech side, and then from the artists and the more creative side, well, where is our slice of this pie? Tim, where do you think the answer will lie in terms of training AI models?
So, something the question of how do we get money to artists, I think, has been one which has never in history seems to have really had a really good answers. Has it been patronage? Has it been, is it or the patronage online or offline or so? The fact that when it used to be, maybe, what was it, a heyday when you could release vinyl records and people would have to buy you vinyl records in order to listen to music, but now everything's streamed and you have to do gigs or do merch, and so which is no way really to pay the bills, and so I feel that we need to look at I like the ideas of having direct connections between an artist and somebody who's listening to music. For example, when you do that, there's technology which we can put in there. When you record a song, when you take a picture with your camera, then you can put that on your computer and then you can digitally sign it. So you can put something on there which will demonstrate that whoever might be competing with you out there in the market with AI, this was actually made by you, and you can put your public identity as an artist on it. And then when I'm looking in the browser, I should be able to right click, I'd look at the little bar and say, what is the provenance of this? So that's the browsers that I know are really interested, browser manufacturers really interested in putting more power for me as the user to figure out where that came from. And we have provenance technology which allows you to record the metadata about if you took that photograph and then you put it in Aldecom and I clipped it out and I put it in my slideshow and that's what you saw. So that's tracking on that provenance is it's not rocket science. We just have to do the work to add a lot more.
Yes.
A lot more power of tracking provenance with the metadata. That's one of the things which is relatively easy to do. We just have to do it.
Yes. Well, I mean, of course, and there's a huge need for this. I mean, you look at things like the conflict in Ukraine and Gaza. I mean, there are images flooding the internet. No one really knows if they're real or not. And there's sort of a tendency for people to just go, well, we can't believe anything we see anymore. Who knows? I mean, Nigel, do you have faith that we're going to be able to establish this provenance tech that Tim's talking about?
I think there's going to be a huge amount of research and a whole range of products and services that seek to do that because it is a pressing need now. It has been, it's not an entirely new problem, but in this era of massive content creation, we will want to know. And I think we want to know that in all sorts of contexts. Even in science, I mean, science is going to be disrupted by generative AI, and the data in science is going to be disrupted. If you think about having an AI decide how much time you'll get on a large telescope, or whether or not it's going to review your paper for you, or whether or not this particular data set that's been submitted in your paper is likely to be true or not. There's lots and lots of kind of aspects. Fake experiments. I mean, I think people sometimes think that the scientific method is so absolute. Not everybody does, but it has a clean methodology. But actually, scientific fraud and misrepresentation is a substantial problem that the best journals have to deal with and think about. So tracking origin, provenance, chains of custody and stewardship is going to be super important. And I think it'll be one of the areas that we'll see a lot of development and innovation. And I think with the ODI's hat on, we talk all the time about data infrastructure, data literacy, data assurance. And assurance is all about these questions of origin, quality, and the characteristics of the data such that you can trust it or not.
And of course, it also relies on people adopting it, and maybe the people that we most need to adopt it won't be the first to do so. I mean, Tim, how optimistic are you that we will be able to resolve this? I mean, where do you see this sort of going ultimately?
Life, the universe, and everything going. I think. Well, I guess I'm a professional optimist because so I have to be because we have to. I become a practical optimist because the people I'm actually working with, sort of day to day, on building systems where people have digital sovereignty, have control over their data. These people are all excited about because we're building towards this vision of a empowered people collaborating. The huge problems like climate change being solved by people collaborating systems across borders, and building systems where the collaboration is very strong and sort of brings compassion across different countries, but also has you can always check the provenance, make sure the data you're looking at is real, the picture you're taking forward was a real artist's picture, and so on. So we're building these exciting new worlds, and surrounded by people doing that, it means that so I can see it all happening. It's going to be a huge amount of work, and I suppose, but. So I'm going to then focus on the fact that a lot of these programs, which we thought we'd have to write to help us use personal data, they can now be written by AI to a large extent anyway. So a lot of the grunt work when it comes to actually building the new world. When you write a program, you have to write tests for it. Try and test the pain, but it's something you do. It takes a long time, but actually now you can probably get your code assistant to write the tests. So it's as in building the new world. And basically, I'm optimistic and excited.
Nigel, you look like you were going to add something in.
No, I think we are obliged to be optimists, and for exactly the reasons that Tim says. And I think that there is always a signal in the noise, and the trick in good science, good engineering, and other aspects of human affairs is to find the signal in the noise and to understand that if we don't, nature has a way of finding you out. Okay, so if we are building solutions or proposals that are based on false assumptions about how the world actually acts, it will tend to find you out. And I think that we need to be more innovative about how we do that in other processes where physics and chemistry run independently of our views and political preferences. Human affairs is wrapped into a whole set of social and political preferences, and of course that is where the contested area often is. And so what we'll need to do is think very hard about how we assure and ensure that these systems can be used to empower us, not oppress us, and not disrupt and drive us into echo chambers of collective thought or into undermining the democratic process.
And of course we have lots of practice with learning from previous mistakes. So I believe we're now going to go to a few more questions from the audience. Can't wait to hear what people have got to ask.
Yeah, I mean, actually, just some praise for Tim for recognising the work of artists and giving them credit. That was much appreciated by the audience. One question was more of a comment, but could be turned into a question about imbalances in power. I think the uncomfortable reality is that we live in a deeply unequal world and deeply unequal societies. Tax avoidance, environmental destruction, etc., have all been erased to the bottom, where those with money and power can flout regulation. I don't see AI being any different without fundamental changes to these power imbalances.
Well, yes. I mean, how long have you got? I mean, certainly when you look at big tech, I mean, these companies have only got more and more powerful and richer and richer. I mean, does that concern you? I know that we ended on an optimistic note. Now I'm dragging us back down again. But I mean,
disequities, inequities, failure of all sorts of distribution of benefits and goods. But we should remember that these technologies can sometimes act as disruptors. I mean, particularly when we think about these technologies, yes, if all the data is being harvested into the central platforms, if the whole model is monetarization around various forms of ad tech or whatever the most profitable way is, we will be in problems. But I'm also hopeful that we can use these systems in health, in education. If we really can build effectively personal tutors, lifelong tutors for everyone on the planet, may sound that's an extraordinary potential breakthrough. In the same way that we now have, with the supercomputers in our pockets, with our iPhones, access to the world's information, access to information about where we are, how to get from here to there. There are so many additive benefits, but we have to be eyes wide open about not allowing the big platforms to appropriate everything in their interests and then assuming so much money that they then decide how they will redistribute it back out. So fair taxes, fair hypothecation, balanced societies.
Yeah, I wonder if we can actually zoom, we've got very kind of macro there. I wonder if we can zoom really into a problem that we haven't touched on yet, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on. And that's the problem of hallucination and the tendency of AI, these AI systems to go rogue, make things up and do so very convincingly. Is that something that, I mean, it's a problem that we haven't fixed yet, and maybe we won't be able to. I wonder, is that going to hold back adoption, or do you think that's something that can be overcome?
So, sorry, I'm not an expert on that area.
Yes.
But when you listen to the people that released GPT-4, one of the things they said is that you shouldn't be just amazed at how powerful it is. What you should be amazed about is the difference between 3 and 4. So, so huge changes. 4 ended up with something as being a place where it could write amazing essays, do everything in verse as well, and do but every and every now and again hallucinate. So I personally, I don't expect that to be long-term either, because actually when 5 comes around, it's actually just hallucination becomes a vanishing problem just because the system is just better, for example, or because it's actually boxed. So you can build a system out of more systems. So you can build AI to monitor another AI. So you could have people talked about having you have this AI here which may hallucinate, and you're trying to ask questions. So first of all, you have an AI which you ask it the question. It says actually the prompt you probably should be using to get that would, for example, be this. So you have one AI doing the prompt engineering, watching the result, but then also it's then filtering the results, saying, "Oh, sorry about that," but it's giving you something which is obviously nonsense. And so having a second layer of AI, which is just as a hallucination checker on the output, for example. So I think that's
a great response, actually. Yeah. I mean, I do think that you can expect, as for Tim says, hallucination to be squeezed down, not entirely out forever because of the nature of these approximation systems, essentially. But layering, as say, the other thing that's a challenge, of course, is keeping the systems current. The challenge, what's called fact editing, that things change in the world. And ChatGPT 4 currently, its knowledge is as of April 2023, and there will be stuff that will have happened, fallen out of date. Now, again, there's a very active area of research. How do you modify the model without having to retrain the whole thing to incorporate these new facts that have arisen in the world, or indeed in constantly changing environments like real-time information systems. There'll be work to do there, but there's a huge amount of ingenuity being applied to work out how essentially the traditional model of discrete digital systems, which were in a certain sense operating under very different rules of inference and reasoning, they might be able to help with these approximators, which have so much broad scope. And how do you bring these different elements of AI together into larger assemblages would be very, I think, interesting area of development.
Plenty of homework for engineers to be getting on. I believe we've got time for one more question.
One more, a quick one. What's the key message you want us to take away as an audience from today about AI, and what should we be talking to others about?
You should be talking to others about data. This is the Open Data Institute. You should realize that that AI is a tool, just like you have your browser as you browse the web, and then search engines came along as this really powerful tool. But actually, they still rely on the search engines only work because of all the links. So you couldn't stop making links in web pages. Now AI is this really powerful tool. It's helping us do stuff with data, things like the Great Core. We haven't applied it yet to one of the reasons why it's not yet very exciting to use it as a personal tutor or to AIs is it hasn't been applied to all the personal data out there. So it's been applied to all the public data, but it hasn't been applied to all that mail, all the chat, all the private stuff. So it's all about the data, the power of the AIs from the data, because we haven't found a way to safely and preserving privacy allow an AI to learn from all of the private experiences of all the people out there. So it's a fundamental limitation. So it's all about the data. So we talked about lots of aspects of the data. I'm particularly keen about that people should have data in data pods. One end of the privacy spectrum, ODI started off being a place where telling governments to put their government data on the web. Everything in between now, the whole of we call the data spectrum, is any data. Much of it is anywhere on the spectrum is important. Is going to or any of it. It has to be clean. It has to be reliable. It has to be. It has to have provenance associated with it, and so we can if we want AIs to do the right thing, the data infrastructure has to be great.
Yeah, and the data infrastructure. Back to data infrastructure, foundational. it needs to be invested in. You don't get it for free in the sense of it just kind of happens to be lying around there. We all have to invest in different ways in making the data as good as it can be, to stewing it, collecting it, making sure it's as good a quality as it can be. So if my mantra at the moment is there is no AI without data, and there's no AI for good without good data. So that's what I'd kind of like people to think about.
Now, I want the three of you to stay here with us so we continue for a couple more minutes, because now, as promised, we've got the results of our poll. We asked our summit audience the following question: do you expect that there will be significant changes to your work as a result of AI in the next 18 months? The options were 1, very little change; 2, some elements will change; and 3, significant changes affecting important parts of my work; or 4, transformational change affecting most areas of my work. So here's the results of the survey. 268 people have voted. Very little change, 17 votes, so 6.3%. Some elements will change, 46%. Significant changes, 36%. And transformational changes affecting most areas of my work, 10%. So it seems that some elements will change, seem to be the most popular answer.
What do you make of
what
that?
do you think?
It's a nice kind of, yeah. I mean, that's going to be the truth. I mean, this stuff will be augmenting lots and lots of what we do. You're going to see it in products like Copilot. So everybody will be exposed to some aspects of this. And for some people, it might be more substantive, either through their ingenuity of putting these things to work, or because somebody's come up with a great service that just really does disrupt how they do what they do.
Oh, interesting.
And what do you think, Tim? What's your reaction to the poll?
Well, yes. Okay, the poll itself means people are spread around there. I'm not surprised. So, I think it will vary hugely. It really depends which business you're in, whether you get disrupted, and we may not obvious. I mean, things like Uber disrupting. The web and cell phone is disrupting taxis. That sort of thing. It's hard to look ahead and see which jobs the given technology will affect, or whether there'll be new jobs. Maybe new jobs we never imagined.
Well, I wish we could talk about this more, but that's all we have time for, unfortunately. Thank you. Thanks both of you so much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte.